Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, May the 21st, 2026. Today, the Sun moves into Gemini. In fact, yesterday, Wednesday, the Sun moved into Gemini if you're in the Americas. So the Gemini season has arrived. And in this video, I want to spend some time talking about, what it might mean for the Sun to make this sign change. I'll also be talking about, the overall astrological picture as well as the 12 signs. So let's start with this overall picture. So here is the chart for today, set for noon New York time on Thursday, May the 21st. By the way, Dina, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as what's going on, the moon is in Leo and the sun is in Gemini. So there it is, the sun at 0 degrees 37 Gemini at noon in New York. So from an American perspective, the sun is quite settled in Gemini. And we have also the moon in Leo. So, we had all those planets in Cancer. We still got Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, but moon is no longer there. And, moon moving into Leo, the moon kind of loses strength moving from Cancer to Leo. I mean, Cancer is a great sign for the moon to be in. Leo, not so great. I mean, I know 1 in 12 of you are going to have your moon in Leo, and I'm sure you handle the moon in Leo very well. But, all things being equal, the problem of the moon in Leo is that the moon doesn't have any dignity in this sign. It's obviously, the moon does not rule Leo, the moon is not exalted in Leo, the moon does not have any minor dignity in Leo, whether it's the face or the terms. The moon, sun and moon don't have any terms, so it's a little bit weak. It's a little bit fragile. All things being equal, the moon in Leo. Of course, if the moon is in mutual reception with the sun, if you've got the sun in Cancer, that is a different matter. But the moon is in a fire sign. Along with Saturn, so it does give some fire. It does provide a bit of energy, a bit of spark, and the moon is making quite a lot of aspects. So the first thing that happens when the moon moves into Leo is it makes a sextile to the sun in Gemini. So the moon right at the beginning of Leo makes that sextile to Gemini, makes a sextile to the sun right at the beginning of Gemini. And so, that is, it's a good aspect. Moon sextile sun is, it's positive because, you're dealing with a fire sign and an earth sign, a fire sign and an air sign. And it is, it's quite sort of easygoing. It's very communicative, moon sextile sun in it. But that moon sextile sun, that doesn't mean that the quality of conversation is terrific. It might be a little bit superficial, but you have to think about what is the function of conversation. The function of conversation is perhaps to put everyone at their ease, and we don't want things to get too complicated. And the moon doesn't just make a sextile to the sun, it makes a sextile to Uranus. So in fact, it's making a sextile to a Sun-Uranus conjunction. So, that does provide, I think, a certain amount of excitement. But then the moon moves on and we do have a T-square. So you can see this T-square. There is the moon. And it's making an opposition to Pluto, and it's making a square to Mars. So, in fact, Mars and Pluto over the next week will be moving towards a square, and so we're already starting to feel this Mars square Pluto. And I haven't talked about it yet, but I think now I need to start talking about it. Mars square Pluto, it can be, quite intense. It can be something really brewing. Something is really maybe reaching boiling point, or it could be something that we really want to achieve. There is an achievement aspect to Mars square Pluto, but it can also be about using too much force in order to get a result. We're desperate for a result. We really want something to happen, and we are absolutely definite that we're going to make it happen. But Mars square Pluto, using a lot of energy to achieve something that is not necessarily such a big deal, or we can see that in terms of using a sledgehammer to crack a peanut. I mean, that's one way of looking at Mars square Pluto. But anyway, the moon is involved with this. So today, moon making that square to Mars, opposition to Pluto, we start to get a sort of Mars square Pluto vibes today because of the moon, and it's in fixed signs. Leo, Aquarius, Taurus. So there may be times during the day when certain people are very stubborn. They want to hold firm to things. They are not in the mood for compromise. They want to hold as much power as possible and do not want to give anything away. And that could be a problem. So we don't want to be part of that problem. So if we're arguing about something, we need to have the ability to be flexible and to understand what's going on. And we shouldn't be surprised if some people find it difficult to back down. And this may say something also, about the international scene, how people are behaving, politically. So this T square is certainly something we need to be thinking about, and maybe the tension of this T square is exacerbated by the fact that the Sun is making a conjunction to Uranus. So the Sun has just gone into Gemini, and Uranus, Uranus has been in Gemini for a bit of time, but maybe some people haven't realized that Uranus is in Gemini. It's an important placement for Uranus. Certainly, if you're in the Americas, certainly if you're in the United States, as we know, when Uranus goes into Gemini, the United States tends to find itself at war. Revolutionary War, Civil War, Second World War. Uranus was in Gemini for all three, and now Uranus is in Gemini again. And now that the Sun is conjunct Uranus, it could trigger the US. I'm not saying it will, but there may be a bit of focus on America and what America is doing. But perhaps it's a little bit early to be thinking about that. But it does remind us that Uranus is in Gemini, and in our own lives, we might see something going on. It might be about rebellion. It might also be about restriction. Restriction and rebellion, always sort of walk hand in hand. With Uranus, particularly as Pluto's involved here. Uranus is, slowly starting to make a trine to Pluto. But we're not quite happy with the status quo, and we kind of want to overthrow it, perhaps, if at all possible. And so there is a certain sort of rebelliousness here with this Sun conjunct Uranus. Now, the key event for today is of course the Sun moving into Gemini, and I'm going to talk about the Sun moving into Gemini in a moment. But first of all, I just want to look at the chart from the perspective of Sydney, Australia. So, if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia, this is the positions of the planets at a new noon, sort of Sydney time. The Sun is still in Gemini at noon Sydney time, but in Australasia this morning, the moon might be in very late Taurus. Likewise with the moon. So you can see that the moon at noon is at 29 Cancer. So I've talked a lot about the moon moving through Leo in this video, but if you are in Australasia during the first part of the day, it's certainly in New Zealand, before lunch, the moon is moving through Lake Cancer, so that Leo sign change just doesn't really impact you until until sort of maybe after lunch. Kind of depends on your particular time zone. So there is a bit of a difference, but by the end of the day, if you're in Australasia, the sun's certainly in Gemini, and the moon will be in early Leo. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system, and there you see it. When the sun moves into Gemini, by definition, the Earth moves into Sagittarius. So there's the Earth in Sagittarius, and we have a conjunction between the Sun and Uranus geocentrically. So heliocentrically, we see this conjunction as an opposition. So it kind of makes sense if you think about it. So imagine that the sun is right in the middle of this chart. So, and you're standing on the Earth. So if you're standing on the Earth, you will see that the sun and Uranus are making a conjunction. On the other hand, if you're standing on the sun, which I wouldn't recommend, you would see the Earth and Uranus as making an opposition. But I do like the idea of seeing it as Earth opposition Uranus rather than Sun conjunct Uranus, because it kind of reinforces the idea of the tension of Uranus and perhaps even the rebelliousness of Uranus. Here is the Earth. We are on the Earth, and we are being challenged by Uranus. Uranus is saying, well, things aren't good enough. Things need to change, and you can't be comfortable with the status quo. And so I think that to my mind is a good way of looking at it. And the idea of tension is also shown by the fact that Mercury, heliocentric Mercury, is moving towards a square of Mars. So Mercury square Mars, does stir things up. Mercury is about what we say, what we communicate, and there might be a lot of things to make us angry. So that fits in with Earth opposition Uranus. There's a lot of trouble around, and a lot of irritation. And now I want to turn to the Sun moving into Gemini. And, we all know about Gemini, don't we? Of course, I've got my Sun in Gemini, so I'm not going to go on and on about the Sun in Gemini, but I think I need to mention it. So here is the moment that the Sun moves into Gemini. So I got this figure from, if you go to astro.com, they have all their ephemerides, which give the precise times of when particular events happen. And according to astro.com, it's 1:36:45 a.m. London time that the Sun moves into Gemini. And I'm not going to make a big deal about the location of this chart, but the thing about the Sun moving into Gemini is that it really does reinforce the fact that Uranus is also in Gemini. So this time round, with the Sun moving into Gemini, I think it will have a real sort of Uranus feel to it. Uranus is about change. It's about revolution. And Uranus in Gemini, you could say, it is about communication, and it's of course it's a positive sign. And some of us might feel that this is the future. We have arrived, and we can see the full implications of Uranus being in Gemini. Maybe you will have some experience with AI, with some, we talk about AI. Every other word seems to be AI, and it's kind of annoying. But with Sun conjunct Uranus, we might have an encounter, with technology, and we might see how technology could mess things up for us. And it may actually, though, be about an opportunity. And with with Sun in Gemini, this Sun in Gemini is kind of interesting because of true Black Moon Lilith. So true Black Moon Lilith is at 0 degrees Sagittarius. 0 degrees 0 minutes Sagittarius, at the precise moment at which the Sun is at 0 degrees 0 Gemini. And it's at these stages where I kind of wonder whether my program has accurately reported true Black Moon Lilith. Just don't forget, there is a distinction between true Black Moon Lilith and mean Black Moon Lilith. I use true Black Moon Lilith. And one reason I use true Black Moon Lilith, because it's something you can't just smooth it. You can't just sort of average it. It's something dynamic, and its movement can be quite erratic. And I wanted to demonstrate to myself that I really sort of got it right. And one reminder is that we need to think about what Black Moon Lilith actually is, and the Black Moon Lilith point is the point of apogee. So the apogee is where the moon is furthest away from the Earth. So this is a kind of a check of my own program, because sometimes I doubt my programs. You should never trust your program. The program could seriously embarrass you if it gives you the wrong information. I mean, it sometimes happens. Usually it's because you put in the data wrong, but it does happen. And so there was a point. June the 1st. On June the 1st, so in 10 days' time, 11, 12 days' time, whatever, the moon is on its apogee. And I found somewhere on the internet which told me the precise time that the moon is on its apogee. And so here it is, June the 1st at 5:34 a.m. London time. The moon is right on that point. And sure enough, this program shows that the moon is exactly on true Black Moon Lilith. I just did that just to demonstrate to myself that this program, really was working, really was giving me an accurate position for true Black Moon Lilith. So going back to the Sun in Gemini, I kind of feel that it is relevant that the Sun is opposition true Black Moon Lilith at that precise time, and that might say something about today. True Black Moon Lilith represents things which are perhaps kind of dark and hidden. Yeah, they can be creative as well. I mean, true creativity means that one has to be aware of everything at every level. We can't just look at things at the surface. People talk about creativity in a very casual way. Just being creative, fine. But real creativity requires one to go under the surface, to get in touch with who one really is. Maybe going back to AI, AI can be incredibly creative, can't it? Supposedly, but can AI touch the darkness that is perhaps represented by true Black Moon Lilith, the things that are hidden, the things that represent who we really are? We're not making things up. We're not trying to sugarcoat things. And so it may be a day when we realize what things are really like, and perhaps we have an opportunity here to tune into our own darkness, which is, of course, what Gemini likes to do. Gemini is often able to go to places that other people are not prepared to countenance. Now, the reason Gemini is able to do that is perhaps because Gemini has a certain schizoid nature. And I'm saying this as someone who has their sun in Gemini. By schizoid, I mean you can say things which might be outrageous, which might be offensive. And Geminis can do this because they make a split. They can split themselves off from sort of bourgeois morality. People have all these concerns and they don't want to upset anyone. And Gemini can say, no, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm not going to get involved with this. They can kind of split the mind and the heart, and so that can be how Gemini works, and why Gemini can sometimes be outrageous and can say things which are completely tasteless and are obnoxious. I mean, I'm not as bad as I used to be. Certainly as a child, I was completely awful, but maybe I've sort of moderated a bit. And so with Gemini, what it means for us, I think the main thing with Gemini, this time round, is just the fact that it's tied up with Uranus, and the fact that this over the next couple of days we're really going to start to see Uranus, in all its glory. We're going to get a kind of an idea about what the next 6 years are like. Because obviously Uranus goes into Cancer, I think, in 2032. So we just get a picture. So if you want to know what the next 6 years are like, just have your eyes open, and you might see something, and that what you see really is or could be the shape of things to come. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, May the 21st, 2026. Aries. Not everything is clear. You might like things to be clear. You might even assume that everything is clear, but I don't think it actually is. So if you reach conclusions today, then I suspect you should be questioning yourself. Now, that doesn't mean to say that your conclusions are wrong. It's just that you might have just a certain inclination to could on the wrong things. And if you focus on the wrong things and then take action, then the end results, could be unfortunate. So Aries, don't feel that you have to be in the thick of things. And, there's always a place for analysis, for just doing some thinking. You don't always have to turn your thoughts into action, especially now when you've got the sun moving into Gemini. So the sun moves into Gemini, early this morning, London time. I think it's sort of 1:37 a.m. So Wednesday evening or even Wednesday afternoon in the Americas, the sun would have changed sign. So this, I think, is fortunate. The sun moving into Gemini, and if you think about it, the sun does have a relationship with Aries. I mean, after all, the sun is exalted in Aries. So I know that Mars is ruler of Aries, but in a way, the sun is kind of a subordinate ruler, or it's a secondary ruler. And so I do think that when the sun moves into Gemini, there is a changeover. And when you think about Gemini, you do think about ideas. You think about thinking about one thing, thinking about another thing, considering different possibilities, and not always committing yourself. I mean, there are many reasons why you might not want to commit yourself. I mean, it could be that you don't have all the facts. It could be, as I've just suggested, that your understanding of the facts is in some respects mistaken. But it could also be that things are changing. Things are rapidly changing. And, the sun, when it moves into Gemini, straight away makes a conjunction to Uranus. Well, almost straight away. I mean, over the next day, over the next 24 hours, Thursday, Friday, the Sun makes that exact conjunction to Uranus, and it's an exciting conjunction. It can really stir things up. Things happen which just hadn't occurred to you. You thought you knew everything, and then there's always something else to discover. And so, ideally, Aries, you should be putting yourself in a position where you can take on new information. And what you mustn't do is just assume that you have got all the answers, because you haven't. And it's always worth talking about something. It's always worth reading, watching, maybe even sort of educating yourself. I'm not saying you're not well educated, but you could always know more. And once you get that information, then you might sort of feel just a whole lot better. And if you're well informed, what can go wrong. And as far as how you're feeling, the moon is changing sign. In fact, the moon has changed sign. The moon is now in Leo. So, the sun and the moon are pretty important when we interpret a chart. The sun and the moon are the lights. These two bodies, the sun and the moon, are definitely bodies which have a physical influence on the Earth down here. We can't say the same for the other planets, at least not in any sort of direct and scientifically comprehensible way. So with the sign change, with the sun moving into Gemini, moon moving into Leo, that means we've got the light moving into positive signs, sun moving into an air sign, moon moving into a fire sign. That just means that maybe, Aries, you can feel pretty good about yourself. You can feel dynamic without necessarily having to be dynamic. We have ideas about what does it mean to be dynamic. Is that someone who is always doing something new, who's always starting new projects? That's not necessarily what it means. It's not just about action. It's about your thoughts and about your awareness of what is possible, and being able to sort of move beyond your sort of existing state. Now, going back to this idea about Aries having potentially more than one ruler. I mean, yes, of course, Mars is ruler of Aries, but sometimes it is worth making a choice or trying to make a choice. So the thing about completely identifying with Mars right now is that Mars is in Taurus, and as I've been saying over the last few days, Mars doesn't actually work very well in Taurus. Things can be slow, and it's good sometimes that things are slow. There are things that need to be consolidated, but if you completely identify with the Taurus energy, then it might be very frustrating. And the last thing we want is you to feel completely frustrated for the next, I don't know, nearly 6 weeks or 5 weeks, whatever, until the end of next month, while Mars moves through the sign of Taurus. And so instead, what it might be worthwhile doing is to kind of trying to identify with the Sun rather than with Mars. As I've been saying, Sun in Gemini, it's a good movement. The Sun is now out. Sun is now out of Taurus. It's in Gemini, and it is about. It's about variety. It's about talking. It's about thinking. It's about exploring new things, and it's not about being tied to one thing, one activity. And that is the difference between Sun in Gemini and Mars in Taurus. The problem about one of the problems about Mars in Taurus is that you can be over-focused, and you may get it into your head that one thing is really, really important to the exclusion of all else, and it might be a real showstopper. For example, Mars in Taurus might be a concern about money, or it might be an absolute fanatical belief that you are right. And if you have that kind of concern, it could really reduce your potential. And today, one of the aspects we have is a square between the moon and Mars. That Moon Mars square. Okay, it will happen fairly early in the day. If you're in the Americas, very early in the day. But if you're in Australia or New Zealand, I think it's going to be quite an important aspect of the Moon Mars square. But the thing about the Moon Mars square is that it could kind of upset things. You could almost sabotage yourself with Moon square Mars. And how you might sabotage yourself is just being focused on just one thing. You decide one thing is important. You give it everything, and you refuse to compromise, and you stick with it. And all the while, you're missing opportunities. You're getting annoyed. You're getting angry, and in general, it spoils your luck. So if you find yourself getting annoyed over the course of the day, well, particularly at the beginning of the day, it's a good idea to snap out of it. Though it's quite possible that the moon, having made that square to Mars, you will feel better quite quickly. So by the middle of the day, certainly if you're in the Americas, the irritation should be starting to move, and things should be, I think, getting a lot easier. And so as the day unfolds, you should start to be seeing the possibilities. And Moon is in Leo, and with the Moon in Leo, that is a time for you to be creative, to not to be overly cautious, and certainly not to be stuck in one thing. That would be a shame, because you want to give yourself as many possibilities as possible. And perhaps it's not a time to make choices yet. While the sun is in Gemini, if you make a choice now, you could be limiting yourself, and I don't think, Aries, that is what you need. Taurus. Mars is, of course, moving through your sign, and there are advantages of Mars moving through Taurus. It certainly makes you feel strong, I hope, and it allows you to be really, very determined. You decide on one thing and you stick with it. Of course, there are problems about being too determined. You might just move slowly forward, not stopping. A bit like a slow-moving juggernaut, but a juggernaut that might at times be blind to what's going on. You roll forward, and you just don't see what the juggernaut is doing. So be aware of alternatives. Be aware of different possibilities, and I think it's also important, Taurus, that you aren't too stubborn, but you also have some self-respect, because the moon is now in Leo. The moon is actually making a square to Mars, and Mars and Leo are both in fixed signs. So it's possible with this moon square Mars that you might hold firm to something rigidly and refuse to accept change. You are not going to countenance change. At least you don't want to, and you kind of want to look away. But all the while, things are happening. One thing is happening is that the sun is out of Taurus. So very early in the morning, London time, the sun moved out of Taurus, into Gemini, which would have been late yesterday, in the Americas. And so, when with the sun moving into Gemini, you could argue that reduces your focus, because you did have both the sun and Mars in Taurus. That could have made you focused, could have made you a bit angry at times, having those two fiery planets in your sign. So you might say having the Sun move into Gemini sort of perhaps eases things a little, makes you a little less intense, but it does, open sort of new possibilities. And, with the Sun in Gemini, consider the possibility that there is another approach in many areas. For example, money. There's now, in fact, we've got the build up to a Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini, and that could have an impact on your finances. It might well be that you see something new of a financial nature, something that hadn't occurred to you, and that can work both ways. It might be that you suddenly have an insight about how you could make money. You hadn't really thought about it. It could be that you start to see how maybe technology could help you. Perhaps you had been sort of dismissive of technology. Many Taurians have a bit of a Luddite streak. The Luddites. I'm not very good on that period of history. Industrial Revolution, isn't it? The Luddites. So the Luddites, I think, were a group of people that they wanted to smash up machines because they recognised that they thought that machines were going to take away people's jobs, their identity, and everything else. Probably the Luddites had a point, and every Taurus maybe does have a Luddite streak, wanting to turn away from technology, and there's always a good argument for it. I was looking at a video. I think it was a video from Australia, and it was about a school that had decided to ban laptops, and they'd already banned telephones, and they were immediately seeing sort of academic results start to improve. So technology can be a problem, but in your case, right now, I think that technology cannot be ignored, and I think that there is a way to use technology, not just to make yourself more productive, but also to boost yourself, in a financial way. So that is a way in which you can use this Gemini energy in a constructive sense. Just because you have been doing something, in the same old way forever, doesn't mean to say you can't make a change. You've still got to be a Taurus. You've got to be down to earth. You don't want to be in a situation where you lose control of things. But you've got to try, I think, to be flexible. But there is another way of looking at what's happening, and it might be that, in a financial sense, something happens which you hadn't necessarily planned for, and your immediate reaction might be shock. Not just surprise. I'm talking about today and maybe tomorrow. The stimulus is, I think, neutral. It's not that anything bad has happened or anything good has happened. It's like something has changed, and the goodness or badness of the event kind of depends on your reaction. And so, if you can be flexible, if you can be open-minded, even be excited. Every change has some value, and if you're being told about the future, maybe you're even getting an early warning about the future that other people don't get, then yes, you can take advantage of it. So, for example, if you're a Taurus who is planning on building a business or starting a new business or expanding an existing one, then I think that right now you can be pretty inspired. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, you certainly have a degree of power. With Mars moving through your sign, you can you can give the impression of having quite a lot to offer, and it might be that right now the other person in some respects is in a weaker position than you. regardless of what that relationship is about. Now, it might not seem like it on the surface. Maybe someone is pretending to be strong, pretending to know what they're doing, pretending to know what they're talking about. But I think if you actually look at things, at a really sort of basic level, and you try to ask yourself, what is going through someone's mind and what someone's motivations are, I think you will start to recognize that you are the one in a stronger position. And so there's nothing to give away. And additionally, it's probably not a good idea to be listening too hard to what other people are talking about. Especially if you're planning on taking action as a result of what you're being told. So you might be told something. Your first inclination might be to sort of believe what you're being told, but the reality might be different. Some people really are confused. They don't know. They might sound convincing, but as soon as you scratch the surface, as soon as you ask a few questions, you'll sort of recognize that really the other person has some major gaps in their knowledge, and in fact, you probably have a better idea about what is going on from them. So relationships. There's no reason why relationships can't go well today, but just make sure that it's you who has the final decision. Gemini. So the Gemini season has finally started. The sun is moving into your sign. The sun moves into Gemini, I think, at 1:37 a.m. London time. So if you're in the Americas last night, or even maybe in Hawaii or Alaska, may even have been, would have been late on Wednesday late on Wednesday afternoon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the sun might not move into Gemini until sort of lunchtime or something like that. But it kind of completes the picture. You've now got the sun in Gemini. There's Mercury in Gemini, and there's Uranus in Gemini, and so it's your time of year. And this time round, the sun is conjunct Uranus, so there may be sort of a real sort of Uranus feel to what you're experiencing, particularly today and tomorrow, when the sun is making a conjunction to Uranus. And that means, Gemini, that maybe you can be a real Gemini. Gemini, at its best, is of course intelligent, is interesting, is original, has sparkling wit. The accolades go on, don't they? Well, of course, I would say that, wouldn't I, having my sun in Gemini? So do make the most of everything, and if you feel that something is right, then it probably is right. And I think at the same time you have real authority. So this really is your time of year. And so over the next month, while the sun is moving through your sign, make sure that you have an impact, and make sure, ideally, that the world at the end of June, when is it, 21st or whenever, when the sun moves into Cancer, is different in a good way. Geminis get bored, and perhaps you have been getting bored recently. You've known that there's so much more you could do, but you haven't done it. And now you have your chance, especially that you have Mercury, your ruler, in Gemini. Mercury is in its own sign. So I really do think that things are moving, and additionally, you have a certain amount of authority. It's not just you being clever, trying to be clever. No, you'll succeed at being clever. Don't worry. It's not just that. It's you seem to know what you're doing, and you know how to work with the obstacles. There are always obstacles, things trying to prevent us from being successful, things we have to negotiate. It might be powerful figures, maybe governments, laws, regulations. And right now we kind of understand it all. We understand what we need to do. We understand how we can negotiate it, and also we should recognize that we ourselves can be figures of power, and the words we say, maybe even the directives we make, can be of great consequence, and can at the same time be well judged. And the moon additionally is in Leo. It's a great place for the moon, Leo, if you're a Gemini. I mean, it's not in itself so great, because the moon doesn't have any dignity in Leo. It doesn't have any. It doesn't have any negative dignity in Leo. It's not fallen, or it's not in its detriment in Leo. But the moon doesn't always function well in that sign. But if you're a Gemini, moon in Leo, moon in the third house from Gemini, is good, because the moon joys in the third house, and particularly when the moon is sextile the sun, and that is an aspect we have. And the moon is not just sextile the sun; it's also sextile Mercury. So that means, Gemini, that we can express ourselves, extremely well. The sun and the moon Mercury and the moon are the two communication planets. Mercury is how we communicate through our mind and our intellect. The moon is more about sort of emotional communication. So the moon and the sun and the moon, and the Mercury and the moon, having this sextile relationship, does allow us to really speak in a way that is convincing and is interesting, and also I would have said well judged. And so that is all looking good, and I think that we can feel happy. It's important to be happy. I say that particularly as a Gemini. What is happiness? That's a problem with being a Gemini. What is your definition of happiness? Happiness can be dissected. Geminis can be quite miserable at times, but there is a possibility of real happiness. And if you see that possibility, then you should go with it. And the moon is not just making a sextile to Mercury; it's also making a trine to Saturn. So that moon trine Saturn may give you the opportunity to take a state of mind, a happy state of mind, and perhaps to give it a degree of permanence. Of course, nothing lasts forever, but I think with that moon trine Saturn, we can put ourselves in a position where we can rely on other people even. And so happiness might not just come from ourselves; it might also come, for example, from our sort of friends and associates, and so on. Now, in terms of relationships, things can be okay. There's no reason why relationships can be too difficult. But I'm not saying that things are 100% perfect. And one problem might be the fact that true Black Moon Lilith is kind of in the wings. So okay, true Black Moon Lilith, is this point that can move quite quickly. It can move in quite an erratic way, and it represents perhaps the darkness. I mean, literally, it's the night, isn't it? Sort of Lilith is, I think, the Hebrew for night. And so when you've got the Sun opposition true black moon Lilith, as you do today. In fact, the moment the Sun goes into Gemini, it is its opposition true black moon Lilith. I mean, here is a chart for that moment. And so here it is. At that moment, when the Sun is at 0 degrees Gemini, true black moon Lilith is at 0 degrees Sagittarius. And that's kind of interesting. And I think that you may see the darkness, and you may see the darkness in another person if you open your eyes, if you want to look for it. And I think it might be there. Now, what does that actually mean? Is it bad? I mean, it sounds bad, but you could argue that you can't really trust someone unless you see the dark side of their personality. If someone is constantly good, you can't see anything bad about them, they're always nice, then there's good grounds for suspicion. If you know that someone is horrible in some areas, then you could argue it's just easier to trust them because you know them as a person. You know their darkness. You can see their darkness, and so as far as relationships are concerned, with the Sun and Uranus, opposition true black moon Lilith, if a relationship is important, this is what you should be looking for. You should always ask yourself, how is this person unpleasant? What might this person be hiding? And once you find the answer, then it might be easier to trust them. It might also be a time when you decide that this is not something you want to deal with. Though we also need to consider the possibility of projection with this Sun opposition true black moon Lilith, and it could be that you see someone behaving in a particular way, or saying something, or you suspecting that they might be thinking something, and you think that's bad, but it might be a reflection of who you are. And so with Sun opposition true black moon Lilith, it's always good to be aware of our own darkness, our own unpleasantness, perhaps our own evil, because if things come out into the light, then in a way they become less destructive, and so it's perhaps not a time for hiding things. And we should be aware that there is always something lurking in the shadows. But if something's lurking in the shadows, it's not necessarily a negative. It might be something positive. And when something is recognized that's lurking in the shadows, it can become really exciting, and can become part of that sort of infinite variety that the average Gemini should be looking for. Cancer. So Cancer, the moon is now in Leo, and so the moon, you had the moon moving through your sign, and I hope you enjoyed the moon moving through your sign. It was in the same sign as Jupiter. It was in the same, and also you had Venus in Cancer. So that was a good foundation, having that stuff in Cancer, and it was perhaps a beginning. But now that the moon is moving into Leo, things do change, and with the moon in Leo, okay, it's not necessarily the best place for the moon to be in. The moon, it doesn't have any dignity in Leo, so you may feel a slight disappointment at some level. You thought that things were going well, and with the moon in Leo, it's harder to make an impact, and and certain things, might be quite exhausting. I mean, you think about the moon in Leo. I mean, the moon in a fire sign. You know, yeah, the sun works very well in Leo, but not so much the moon. And yeah, you might want attention, you might want appreciation, but at times, it might perhaps be lacking. Though, the moon, when it moves into Leo, it does make a sextile to the sun, makes a sextile to Uranus as well. And so, with those two aspects, I think you can get something together. I think it is. I mean, I think it does suggest that you can, make things happen, in a positive way. And you could argue that Cancer is like on the midpoint. So you've got the sun in Gemini, you've got the moon in Leo, and so you've got Cancer right in the middle. So yeah, Cancer is on the sun moon midpoint. Cancer is on the moon Uranus midpoint. It's on the moon Mercury midpoint. So that means that there is certainly a way of harnessing your energy, in a constructive way, but not necessarily in a way that is especially dramatic. And it could be, Cancer, that you have an opportunity to, work behind the scenes. You don't really need attention. You might think you need attention, but you don't need it. And if you find yourself being ignored, I don't think you want to be ignored, but if you are ignored, I don't think it matters. And there are certain benefits of being ignored. If you're being ignored, you have more freedom. You don't have to be self-conscious. You can just do things in your own way. You can just get on with it. And the moon in Leo sort of has a financial side to it. The financial side, can never be entirely ignored. If you're a Cancerian, I mean, Cancerians do like to look after themselves and their own interests, and there's certainly nothing to be ashamed of there. And the moon in Leo is making a trine to Saturn, and this moon trine Saturn, I would say, is pretty useful. So you've got the moon making a sextile to Mercury and a trine to Saturn, pretty much at the same time. So that indicates, Cancer, that you really are able to get yourself together. You can concentrate on something that is important to you. It may have a financial side to it. It could be about your ambitions for the future, and you just you concentrate on it, and sooner or later, you can get real results. And in the process, you shouldn't worry too much about other people. There really is an argument for keeping a low profile. If you spend time with another person or a group of other people, it just could be annoying. Other people are quite set in their ways right now, or at least they might appear to be set in their ways. And if you have to interact with them, there could be disagreements. We've got, in fact, we've got a T-square today. I hadn't really noticed this before. That this T-square, we've got Moon opposition Pluto, and we've got sort of Mars, on the T. So you can see, but Mars is starting to make a square to Pluto. This is something I need to talk about. This Mars square Pluto, it's getting stronger now, and it's going to be a thing soon. But the Moon is picking up on that Mars Pluto square. So if we think about what that might mean, it could actually be quite intense. You find that there are things that you actually want. You kind of want them. You want them now. And going back to the financial side of things, I perhaps want to slightly edit what I just said. I said that money is important to you. That right now, I mean, it is important to the average Cancerian, but I perhaps underestimated how important it might actually be with this T-square. you want to get results, and I think you may be becoming aware of the consequences of financial mismanagement or of financial lack. So there might be a little bit of urgency here, at least subjectively. I'm not saying there is a financial crisis, but you might perceive a financial crisis. While the moon is square Mars and Pluto, and you might be looking for a result. You might be looking for a big change, and I think you can get that big change. The moon is not just making those squares to Mars and Pluto. It is also making a sextile to Mercury. So don't panic. Don't assume that there is only one way of handling your finances. There are many things you can do, many directions you can go in, and if you are persistent, then I think eventually you will win through, because Cancerians, when it comes to a fight, when it comes to a struggle, usually Cancerians win through. So if you perceive a battle, then I think it is a battle that you can win. Leo. Moon is now moving through your sign, and the moon is making a lot of aspects. It is quite active, and so it might be a day when when a lot is going on, when there is a lot to work through, and you're conscious of what could go wrong. You're also conscious of what needs to be done. So just because the moon is in Leo doesn't mean that everything is just easygoing and relaxing. No, there could be a bit of a struggle, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. When the moon moves into Leo, it makes a sextile to the sun. It also makes a sextile to Uranus, and it makes a sextile to Mercury. So that does give you, a lot of talent, and it gives you a lot of possibilities. And then, the moon makes a trine to Saturn, so you're quite capable of handling everything, and things should be, relatively easy. But at the same time, we've got a T-square. So this T-square does involve the moon. So, the definition of a T-square in astrology is when you've got two planets in opposition to one another, and then you've got another planet on the T. So what's happening is that the moon makes a square to Mars, and then it makes an opposition to Pluto. So you have a moon-Pluto opposition, which could say something about other people. It could be about other people who might on the surface appear to be quite threatening. You might perceive another person as being an enemy, or you might perceive a zero-sum situation where someone has got to be a winner and someone has got to be a loser. It's not a situation where everyone can win. Maybe everyone can lose, but it is a potential conflict, or at least you're perceiving a conflict, and you have to ask yourself, to what extent is that conflict real? Sometimes you can imagine a conflict. You can imagine that another person does not have your best interests at heart. So you've got to be realistic here, and you don't want to sort of trip yourself up by imagining something that doesn't exist. And then the moon, just before it makes the opposition to Pluto, it makes a square to Mars, and we might see Mars as being an aggravator. It can be certainly an aggravating influence. You may feel that you are looking for a conflict, or someone else is looking for a conflict. It might seem to be a real battle, but we could see Mars as being a solution. So if you're feeling conflict, if you're feeling conflicted, if you feel there's something that needs to be resolved and you can't resolve it, perhaps it's sort of an interpersonal situation, and someone is annoying you, or you think they might be annoying you. Then the solution might well be to prove yourself. And that's where Mars in Taurus comes in. Mars in Taurus, it's in a high profile part of your chart, right at the top of the chart. And perhaps the answer to a problem is to strive and to be successful and to make an impact. It's not about making boasts. It's not about being defensive. It's just about getting just results. If you get real results in the real world, then you don't have to worry about anything. And that might be about how Mars in Taurus is working. Mars in Taurus, it's going to be in this sign for the next nearly 6 weeks, 5 or 6 weeks. It moves out of Taurus, at the end of next month, end of June. And so, while Mars is in Taurus, this just might be a time when you should, strive to be successful and to prove to yourself that you can be successful, that you can have an impact. And it doesn't matter about other people. You might think it does. You might think that certain people, certain situations can hold you back, but it's not true. And perhaps this T-square is going to give you the impetus to make real progress. And don't worry too much about your ego. Yeah, there might be times when you're worried about things, when you feel defensive, but you need to kind of move beyond that. And additionally, you might want to consider sort of aligning yourself to some sort of wider philosophy of life. I mean, this is one of the lessons of Saturn moving through Aries. Saturn stays in Aries until 2028, and I'm hoping that Leo, over the next couple of years, you do develop a constructive philosophy on life. It gives you a way of understanding the events around you, so you don't have to constantly worry what your stance should be, because you've already aligned yourself to something. And the moon is making a trine to Saturn, and I think that this moon trine Saturn is pretty constructive. So as the day progresses, this moon trine Saturn gets stronger, and it kind of gives you the stability that you're perhaps looking for, and also the certainty. If you hold firm to what you believe in, then in the end, what can go wrong? So I'm not saying, Leo, that it's going to be an easy day, but if you recognize that you have real strengths, that if for whatever reason you feel inadequate, or you feel you don't have enough power, then just hard work and determination on your part can make a big difference. And another thing about moon trine Saturn is it does indicate that you can get support. Now, you might feel a little unsupported with moon opposition Pluto. In fact, you might regard certain people as being a threat, but perhaps as the day develops, you'll start to recognize who your friends and allies are. And with that moon trine Saturn, I think you and someone else can develop the right kind of relationship. Virgo. Gemini is now in full swing. We've got Mercury and Uranus in Gemini. Now the Sun's moved into Gemini, and from a Virgo perspective, that's great. It is a time when you need to start recognizing what you can do. It's not a time to be asking yourself endless questions, thinking about what can go wrong. Are you doing the right thing? Are you in line with your destiny, and so on? I think we've moved beyond that. I think, Virgo, you have already reached the right conclusions. And now it's just a question of execution. Execution as in, how are you going to put your plans into action? And you might want to do it at the moment in maybe quite a dramatic way. I mean, there is a Sun-Uranus conjunction taking place today and tomorrow, and this Sun-Uranus conjunction, is perhaps a real sign of Uranus in Gemini. So yeah, Uranus has been in Gemini for a bit of time now, and Uranus in Gemini does stir things up. It makes you aware of what is possible, what you can get off the ground, the way you can create real change. And with the Sun making a conjunction to Uranus, this is when it becomes real. The Sun in a way triggers Uranus. I mean, when I say trigger, it activates it. It doesn't upset Uranus. It activates Uranus. And so it is a time when you need to be original, and you need to project that originality, if possible. It's not a time to be quiet about who you are, provided the setting is right. Now, if the setting is not right, then, well, you can do things on your own. You don't always have to be, with people. That's not the way it necessarily is. And I think over the course of the day, there'll be times when you do need to have your own space, when you need to work in your own way, in your own projects, whatever those projects might be. So perhaps it's a time, Virgo, when you need to sort of move in and out of focus. But perhaps there'll be times during the day when you are very present, but there'll be other times when no one can find you, and perhaps most of the time. But the key thing is for you to keep moving, and certainly not to feel that you're being inhibited or restricted by your environment, because that perhaps is the main thing that matters, is you having the freedom to be an individual. And this is particularly the case in terms of planning and deciding what is important for you. And at the same time, you give the impression of knowing what you're talking about, of having some authority. You talk about things of a practical nature in a way that just sounds very fluent. And people listen to you, and if you if you say that something is possible, then people will believe you. Likewise, if you say something is impossible, then you're going to be sure of your ground. I think you will be very sure of your ground, and you just have a good understanding of authority right now. So that does mean, Virgo, that if you are in a position of authority or leadership, then it's going to be particularly easy to express who you are. And I think that by and large you will be taken seriously. And if anything is not right, you see someone doing something wrong, breaking the law perhaps, doing something which is against the rules, I think you're going to be very good at intervening. Okay, you've got to be careful if we're talking about physical danger, but I'm not really talking about physical danger, I hope. But provided life and limb are not at stake, then I think that you are going to be quite good at making interventions, and I think that people will listen to you. So that's great, Virgo, if you are in any position of authority. Libra. The Gemini season has arrived, with the Sun, Sun now in Gemini, and Sun in Gemini, that's good news if you're the average Libra. I mean, the Sun in Taurus, okay, the Sun is always in Taurus at the same time of year, but it's not ideal having the Sun in Taurus. If you're a Libran, it can just be a time when things can be a little bit difficult and complicated and drawn out, and things aren't entirely straightforward. Particular people aren't straightforward, and okay, that still might be a bit of a problem. I mean, not everyone is easy to understand. Some people are really going into themselves, and they don't want to communicate, and maybe that's having an influence on you. But with the Sun moving into Gemini, it is to an extent a breath of fresh air. I mean, Gemini is an air sign, and finally things are starting to move, and you can start to see possibilities. Okay, we've already got Mercury in Gemini and Uranus, but now you've got the Sun, Mercury, and Uranus in Gemini. Then you're able to you're able to see what is possible. And you might recently have felt that the road was blocked, that there was no way through, but now things very much are changing. And it could be something connected with personnel, with people. Some people, it is true, remain very set in their ways, and they're not being constructive. That might say something about relationships. So do think about your whole pattern of relationships. Think about the way people are. Who is being constructive, who is being supportive, who is just trying to bring everything to a standstill. And with the Sun moving into Gemini, it becomes clearer, perhaps, who your friends are, who is supportive, who is interesting. I mean, don't forget the need to be interested. You don't want too much boredom, and interesting people with interesting ideas should be listened to, perhaps to the exclusion of other people. Some people are not interesting. Some people are just they are completely set in their ways, and I don't think you have to worry about them perhaps as much as you did a few days ago. And continuing on the social theme, the moon is in Leo, and so with the moon in Leo, Libra, I think that your social life is important, but you do recognize that some social scenes are better than others. The moon is making a square to Mars, so moon square Mars can be about a disagreement with someone and that goes back to what I was saying about this idea that you need to make some choices. Who do you want to hang out with? Who do you want to avoid? Because I think that there might be a real distinction here. It could even be the case that your happiness is dependent on other people and your choices about other people. Not everyone is conducive to your general happiness. Some people can make you miserable, but you have a choice. You have a choice about who to spend your time with. So overall, Libra, it doesn't look like being a bad day, and I think that the social environment could actually be very important, and you definitely have choices. And if you want to be energetic in a social sense, I think you very much can be. And it's not just about being energetic just for your general happiness. It's also about what it is that you're trying to get together. This is a time, Libra, when you do need to think about your ambitions, what you are trying to achieve. And the social side of things could be important. If you get sufficient support, then it's more likely that you will be successful. And I think that you really do have a chance to be successful, and the reason for that is because you make the right choices, and you recognize that some people, are supportive. And if you think that you're alone, that you don't have enough support, then I think that you can actually take action to derive that support. So from a social perspective, you don't have to accept the status quo. You don't have to accept things as they are if you don't like it, because you can definitely create some change. I mean, really quite important change. And having the right friends and the right contacts can make all the difference. Scorpio. We've got a T-square today. This T-square involves the Moon, Mars, and Pluto. In other words, it's important to you. The Moon is making a square to Mars. Mars is making a square to Pluto. Now, this Mars-Pluto square is not exact today, but it will become exact over the next week. And so when you think about Mars square Pluto, you think about power. You think about how you are going to assert your power, and what might be holding you back. So there are some real things to consider. And I think that with this T square, it might be the case, Scorpio, that perhaps you are a little bit too introspective, thinking a little bit too much about your own security concerns, making sure that everything is right, making sure that you are completely safeguarded. But you can be too concerned in that direction. But with Mars making a square to Pluto, there is just this danger that you just take some things too seriously. You can overreact, and with Mars square Pluto, one might kind of see it as being sort of like the immune system. I'm not making a medical point here, but it's like Scorpios, they can be defensive, and so when they see a threat, they might overreact, and as a result, things could go from bad to worse. Overreaction is just not a good idea. I mean, you've got to be reasonable. Sometimes you have to react, but if you take things too far, you could really sort of shut yourself down and cut yourself off, and that's absolutely not what you want. I mean, I will be talking more about this Mars square Uranus because I think it is relevant over the next week. Now, but the thing about this Mars square Uranus is it's linked with the Moon at the moment today. So the Moon is making a square to Mars, and then the Moon makes an opposition to Pluto, and the Moon, you kind of feel a bit sorry for the Moon. I mean, there's the Moon in Leo. Leo is not Leo is not the best sign for the Moon to be in. I mean, the Moon is a bit fragile in Leo, particularly when it's making an opposition to Pluto and a square to Mars. And so I would see this Moon in Leo as kind of representing your attempts to be seen, to be making an impact. Perhaps it says something about your work, how you are projecting yourself, and there's a lot going on to kind of sabotage yourself. You could sabotage yourself by being overcautious. You can't do that. You can't to expose yourself to these serious dangers, these imagined dangers. If you are in a high-profile situation, well, you're taking all sorts of risks. You might even reveal who you are. You might give away some of your secrets. You might compromise yourself. So these are the kind of thoughts that some Scorpios can have, and I don't think they're particularly helpful. With the moon in Leo, you should be trying to project yourself, and you can do it in such a way in which you are actually protected. So don't exaggerate the dangers that you are facing. And part of your advantage, the thing that allows you to make progress, is perhaps your basic understanding of other people. So rather than see people as being a potential threat, you can make the effort to understand them. With Mars is in Taurus, Mars is in your opposite sign right now, and of course Mars is your ruler. And so with Mars in Taurus, you can perhaps see things from another person's perspective. And when you see things from another person's perspective, and when you kind of use your sensitivity, then you can make the right moves. And sensitivity is right now, it's not just about things from an emotional viewpoint. Just it's also being sensitive to what things look like. It might be body language, what people are wearing, little material details. You see it, and you kind of draw the right conclusions. You understand what it all means. So, Scorpio, you can put yourself into a position of social knowledge, and because you are in a position of social knowledge, then that does mean that there's a reduced chance of you making mistakes, and you can actually trust yourself to be out there in the world and getting results. Always monitor the environment. But when you monitor the environment, it's not just about using your feelings. I mean, feelings on their own are great. I mean, obviously you're a Scorpio, an emotional sign. But I think if you just use feelings, then you might reach the wrong conclusions. You also have to look at how things are on surface appearances. Now, surface appearances, kind of sounds trivial, but some things just really are obvious. So you look at someone, you might look at the way they're talking, the way they're dressed. You might just see something about their appearance, and you think, oh, that's just too obvious. It can't be as simple as that. Yeah, it might be as simple as that. And so it's about sort of developing the knowledge you need to protect yourself from making mistakes, and then I really do think that you're going to be able to project yourself, and who knows, perhaps you really can be, you can be successful, and you can perhaps make some kind of a breakthrough. Sagittarius. It's nice, Sagittarius, that the moon is in a fire sign. The moon is moving into Leo, so it's out of Cancer, and so when the moon moves out of Cancer, it may be that some of the pressure is reduced. There had been things that you might have been concerned about that perhaps you were taking sort of quite seriously, especially on an emotional level. And when the moon moves into Leo, it gives you, a sense of freedom. And the moon, when it moves into Leo, it makes a sextile to the sun, and then it moves on and it makes a sextile to Mercury. And so perhaps you feel that you're being released from something, and it's then easier for you to just get on with other people and be enriched by other people. And enrichment, does matter. People are there for a reason. They're there to sort of make your life, more exciting. Especially now when the sun has gone into Gemini. So the sun in moving into Gemini. Well, this is a time of the year when the sun is in your opposite sign, and it's making a conjunction to Uranus. So that sun conjunct Uranus is quite exciting, and it's extra exciting because the moon is making a sextile to both the sun and the Uranus. So things can happen which you weren't expecting, and other people can behave in a rather unusual way. Now, that might sound unsettling. I mean, you want things to be, nice and stable. You don't necessarily want surprises, but sometimes it's good to be surprised. Things can get you things can get boring. They can very quickly get boring. Maybe they have got boring recently, but now that the sun is in Gemini, you're starting to see what is possible. And so you don't have to feel that it's up to you to make all the decisions, up to you to spring the surprises. I mean, Sagittarians can be quite good at springing surprises. They can be quite good at causing offense, saying things that are controversial. But maybe right now you can let other people do the work. Just see what they have to offer, and then you can make you can make the right decisions. Maybe you don't have to make any decisions. With this with the sun moving into Gemini, it's perhaps more about thinking about things, being aware of different possibilities. So that all looks pretty good. Well, unless you're looking for complete stability. I mean, if you want things to be absolutely stable, you don't want change, and you're a Sagittarius who has a conservative streak. Some Sagittarians do. As I've said in sort of previous videos, there are several conservative dictators in the past who had their sun in Sagittarius. Augusto Pinochet in Chile, and Franco in Spain. So just because you're a Sagittarius doesn't mean you're open and free thinking. I mean, Sagittarius can be a very moral sign, and they might like things to be done in a particular way, and they can focus on tradition, believe it or not. So yeah, if you're that kind of Sagittarius, it might all be a bit unsettling. But I think for most Sagittarians, it is a time where things are becoming more exciting. But there could just be a moment over the day when something has to be done in order to move forward. So yeah, overall an exciting day, I think, but there may be some obligation, something you haven't done in the past, something that is irritating, and it will stay irritating until it has been addressed. But once it has been addressed, once you've done it, it could be a pain, but it could be just something that takes just 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You do it. Once you get it out of the way, then things really do start to move. And also a Sagittarius, things can happen, and things may be happening, and they may be unfolding, and you might be faced with a situation that appears to be unfortunate. It might not be impacting you directly. It may be other people's misfortune. People have problems. Something goes wrong. Something breaks. Whatever it is. It doesn't seem good, but it seems also, Sagittarius, that you can maybe take advantage of it. I'm not saying you can take advantage of other people, your win is their loss or anything like that, but yeah, something bad happens. It's not happening to you, but it's happening to someone else, and there just may be a way to gain from it. I mean, that may say something about, for example, your profession. If you're a locksmith, of course, you need people to lock themselves out of their houses. Likewise, if you're an electrician, you need people people's fuse boxes to explode. But it could additionally be someone is in trouble, someone's worried about something, and you intervene, you help, you give some advice, you show some sympathy, and in the process you make a new friend, or you kind of you win yourself some social points, and so your reputation can be boosted by how you respond to an unfortunate event. And some Sagittarians may actually be a bit morbid today. Yeah, not just today, but probably over the next couple of days they may be a little morbid, and they may be just focusing on the negative side of things, perhaps thinking about what is going wrong in the world, and not in a way that's bad. It just maybe just something you're interested in, maybe being interested in destruction, in things that are evil, the terrible things going in the world. Just having, I won't say an unhealthy interest, but just an interest in the darker side of life. And I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of here. It's just the way you go. It's just the way you're thinking at the moment, and it's not going to last very long, I don't think. Capricorn. Well, Capricorn, you continue to have quite a sort of a broad, expansive view of the world around you. You're very aware of what is possible, and that has been a picture over the last couple of days, even the last couple of weeks. You've just been observing things going on, unfolding, and you have you've taken notes, and you've found it perhaps interesting, but you're not too worried about the future. That's good. I mean, a lot of people are worried about the future, and I think that perhaps you can be quite reassuring. Now, there are a few changes going on. I mean, one change that we have got is the sun moving into Gemini. So the sun was in Taurus. It was in an earth sign, and I hope you were able to benefit from the sun moving into an earth sign, moving through an earth sign. It perhaps allowed you to ground yourself, and also to recognize that there were certain things in life that you really did enjoy. And if you enjoy something, then you need to you need to stick with it. But now that the sun is moving into Gemini, it's making a conjunction to Uranus in Gemini over the next day or two. Well, I think it's tomorrow that you've got Friday, that you've got the Sun-Uranus conjunction. So you're aware of change, that's for sure. But you're also aware of how change needs to be responded to. So as things change, you might find that things start to get sort of disorganized. Things are no longer sort of in the right place anymore, and that might be bothering you. I think you're going to be quick to see imperfection in your own environment and in the wider world. And it might be tempting to just try to sort things out immediately. Capricorn, the average Capricorn, does appreciate, having some order. We want some order. We don't want complete chaos. But if you are in a situation where you're constantly trying to change things, where you're trying to constantly respond to what is going on, then that can drive you crazy, because it's an impossible task. Because you're in a process of, yes, constant adjustment. So if you are trying to organize things, if you're trying to make plans right now, then you need to be as flexible as possible. And you need a plan, but the plan needs to be very, very loose, because things can change. Things can change very quickly, and the change is taking place at all levels, and you just you need to be very aware of it. But on the positive side, Capricorn, you can take a situation which has been going on for a long time, and you can completely turn it upside down. So if everyone has got used to you behaving in a particular way, organizing your life in a particular way, then you don't have to put up with it. You might just suddenly decide that now is the time to just change everything. And in the process of perhaps causing quite a lot of disruption, you can, in fact, give yourself, a great deal of power. And so the question is, in terms of disruption, where does the power lie? Your first impression might be to think that you are losing power because there is a constant process of change. But you can just turn things round, and you can be the one creating change, and other people are having to adjust to you. So maybe there's a choice there. Who is doing the adjusting? And if you are you're completely sort of proactive about it, then you can be in the center, knowing that in the end things are going to work out, and it's just everyone else having to adjust to you. And that doesn't necessarily sound very nice. Perhaps that you're not sort of treating people with the respect you feel they might deserve, but it's okay. I mean, we do have a trine aspect between the moon and Saturn, particularly towards the end of the day. And the moon trine Saturn, of course, it affects you because Saturn is your ruler, and the moon trine Saturn, is actually quite a good aspect for relationships. It's quite a stabilizing aspect. And it means that, in the end, you will be recognized, and you will be respected, and you hold firm to the changes that you want to implement, and then I think that other people will fall into line, and one particular relationship could develop in quite a satisfactory way, although you have to be respectful up to a point, because a couple of people are feeling a bit fragile at the moment. They're not feeling on absolutely great form. There may be things that they're sort of hiding, that they don't want to talk about, and if you can just put yourself in a position where you are just there, then that would be great. So going back to what I was saying about you having the capacity to cause a lot of disruption, it's true, you do have that capacity, but maybe there are one or two people who, because of their fragility, need to be treated with a bit of sort of extra kindness, and don't be sort of more disruptive than you have to be. Aquarius. We have now the sun moving into Gemini, and when the sun moves into Gemini, it starts making a trine to Pluto. It also makes a conjunction to Uranus, and all this is taking place in air signs. So we've actually got quite a lot of air now. We've got the Sun and Mercury in Gemini. We've got Uranus in Gemini, and we've got Pluto in Aquarius. So Aquarius, I think that this is a time when you can be yourself. When additionally you can, I think, be very creative. Your creativity does matter. Aquarius, has a reputation for being a sign that is original, and yes, creative, can do things differently. And now is your opportunity. Now that the sun has gone into Gemini, so it's not a time to follow the usual path. If you can, if you can do something different, then go for it. And in the process, Aquarius, do think about other people. What are other people up to? Because the moon is in Leo. The moon is in your opposite sign, and the moon is making a lot of aspects. So in fact, we've got the moon moving into Leo at the same time as the sun is moving into Gemini, and that might mean that one particular person appears to be undergoing a change. Perhaps they're becoming more original. They're becoming also sort of more positive and more dynamic, and more interesting. So if in the recent past you had felt sort of disappointed by someone who you might know very well, you might be just spending all your time with them, but somehow they haven't been on very good form recently. Well, I think that might be changing now, and a person who was boring, who maybe felt a bit sorry for themselves, is going to start to sort of come into their own. So that says something about existing relationships, and also future relationships or new and developing relationships. You can start to see the possibilities, and if you feel you need interesting people around you, then I think you might find what you're looking for, or at least it's worth making the effort to find what you're looking for, because it's not just about you. It is about what other people are doing, and what other people can offer. And the moon is making a trine to Saturn. I mean, moon trine Saturn is a bit of a classic relationship axis. We've got it said moon in Leo in your opposite sign, making a trine to Saturn, which is your ruler. And so moon trine Saturn can be about a relationship developing and being a source of some stability. And that stability might actually be something that you can develop. I mean, you're capable of being very down to earth right now, and you can say what matters, and I think that you can be listened to. But in spite of this stability, yes, you are capable of being incredibly original at the moment, and it's just very important that you make the most of what's going on. With that Sun conjunct Uranus, you can really sparkle on an intellectual level, but you don't want to sparkle so much that you are blinding. I mean, in terms of blinding other people, or being blind to what other people can offer, because with that Sun conjunct Uranus, you may not be the only original person in a room. There may be other people who've got something to offer, other people who can be really quite incredible in their own way. And so do give people the space to shine. Pisces. Yes, just as Pisces starts, the dog goes into action, and the dog is fine. Don't worry about the dog. The dog is having fun. Okay, she might not be having fun, but she's definitely got something to bark at. I'm not quite sure what it is. I don't think that's a deer bark. It's just sometimes I think she likes the sound of her own voice. Anyway. So that's the dog, and as far as Pisces is concerned, things are starting to change. I mean, you had a lot of planets in Cancer recently. Well, you've still got Venus and Jupiter in Cancer, but the Moon has moved out of Cancer, has moved into Leo, and so with the Moon moving into Leo, that might mean that things start to quieten. Perhaps there isn't quite the pressure to be yourself and to be original and to always be in the center of things. And with the Moon in Leo, you perhaps recognize that it's more about making sure that something can last. You know, the moon in Leo. Well, moon is a fixed sign, and so fixity is all about giving something the ability to survive. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. It's not just a flash in the pan. And so with the moon in Leo, you might be taking something that you are good at and making some adjustments to it, and thinking about, how you can be good at something, not just today, but over the next month or year or whatever. And in the process, certain things need to be rationalized and maybe tidied up. So it's not necessarily that interesting, but do you want things to be interesting? I mean, in many respects, Pisceans are looking for some stability. I mean, there's nothing wrong with stability. And now that the sun is moving into Gemini, right at the bottom of your chart, I mean, that's what's happening. And of course, the sun always moves into Gemini at the same time of year, at the end of May, 20th, 21st of May, whenever. And so, this can be a time of year when Pisceans want to kind of take stock of everything. You don't have to be original and dramatic. You instead can be focused on yourself and what is important to you. And so things are slower, but the moon is making a sextile to the sun. The moment the moon moves into Leo, it makes that sextile to the sun. So you've got the sun and the moon both changing sign at the same time, and as the sun and the moon both change sign at the same time, it can be quite anchoring. It perhaps does bring you down to earth. It makes you think about what needs to be done. And it just might occur to you that some things aren't important, that you don't have to go out of your way to create action. But you don't want to be in a situation, Pisces, where you are doing absolutely nothing. I mean, you can take things too far. And one issue might be, Pisces, that if you are in one place, if you are thinking about one thing, then you might become overly negative. You could actually become extremely negative. You could have some quite disturbing thoughts about what could go wrong. A lot of things could go wrong in theory. It's like I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and every month or so there's an article about earthquakes. Are you ready for the earthquake? The big one, and it hasn't happened for a long time. But there are these faults on the west coast of America, and have you prepared for it? Have you got your essentials ready to just flee? They're always telling you to do that. Maybe the big one will happen. And of course, the sun is making a conjunction to Uranus, and you could argue that the sun conjunct Uranus is a real sort of earthquake combination. I'm not predicting any earthquakes, by the way. But with the sun making a conjunction to Uranus over the next day or two, it just may be that some Pisceans do feel that the ground under their feet is not entirely stable. And you might be thinking about where you're living and asking yourself, is this the right place to be? And you might also be thinking about, what could go wrong? You might be stable where you are for the moment, but what could destroy that stability? Again, I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen. I'm not making any negative predictions here. I'm just talking about your perceptions, and this might be one reason, Pisces, why you don't want to take risks. you don't want to do anything too out of the ordinary. You've survived so far, so why do anything crazy? Just make sure that you're in one place, in one piece, and that you're sorting everything out, and you're making your little part of the world, as stable as possible, which is good. But just remember with that Sun conjunct Uranus that there may be a cognitive side to that Sun conjunct Uranus. It just may say something about your perceptions, and it just might seem that things are not particularly stable, that it might seem that things could go wrong, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. And as far as stability is concerned, some Pisceans might respond to that Sun-Uranus conjunction by thinking that, or even reaching the conclusion that they need to make a change. That you perhaps lived in a particular way in a particular place for a long time, but is it satisfactory? What does need to change? How dramatic do you have to be, or is it just a question of melodrama? Just really getting obsessed about change, but as soon as the Sun conjunct Uranus has moved on, is starting to separate, you'll find that things just return to normal. But it's something I'll talk again about when I do your horoscope for tomorrow, Friday. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to turn to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 10, which is treading. And treading is about caution. We have to be very careful where we put our feet. And we can look at this absolutely literally. If, for example, you're walking around barefooted, where are you going to put your feet? Are you or stubbing your toe or whatever? So always be careful where you put your feet. Wear a good pair of shoes. Avoid walking barefooted, because you never know what you might tread on. Treading, so being aware of our feet. So that's a literal way of looking at it. But it's also about dealing with a particular obstacle. There's something we have to get round, and the danger is that we awake the tiger, because that's the real issue with treading. We're trying to sort of walk past a tiger, and if we tread on a tiger's tail, well, that could be bad, because the tiger might wake up. It might even bite us. So do be careful and be aware of your limitations. I mean, that really does matter. We have the third line moving, and the third line moving. In I Ching, the third line from the bottom. The third line is often unfortunate, and what the I Ching says about the third line is, it says the one-eyed man is able to see. A lame man is able to tread. He treads on the tail of the tiger. So there are things we can do in theory, even if we're not very good at it. I mean, I'm not saying that one-eyed people aren't good at walking, or aren't good at seeing, but if we want to see perfectly, ideally, we have two eyes. I understand people can function perfectly well with one eye, but we shouldn't overestimate our abilities. It may be that we try to do something that someone else can do better than us. And that is particularly the case if we're doing something which is which is safety critical. And so don't go anywhere near the tiger unless you really know what you're doing, and just do question your abilities, and also question other people's abilities. The one-eyed man or the lame man, that may relate not to us, but it might also relate, alternatively relate to someone else, someone who says they can do something. Yes, in theory they can do it, but just because you can do something in theory doesn't mean that you can do it in practice. Okay, you might be able to do it 9 times out of 10, but that 10th time you could make a complete mess of it, because fundamentally you don't know what you're doing, and your ability to do something assumes perfect conditions. But if conditions are not perfect, then yes, things could go very wrong. And then we have the top line moving, and the top line, it is talking about being able to move forward to some extent, but we still have to be very careful, and we have to know when we've gone too far. But there's an additional way of looking at the top line, and it's the top line is like at the end of the process. So treading, we have moved forward. Maybe we moved forward in a rather hesitant way. Maybe we were careless, but we somehow got there. But the question is, have we made progress? So we have to look back at how we've done things, and then we're able to judge how successful we've been. And we start to see the consequences of our actions. And the I Ching is not telling us whether or not the consequences of our actions are good or bad. It's just saying, we look back, we're looking at the consequences of our actions. And then we got 2 lines moving. And so we move to something else. We move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is breakthrough, hexagram number 43. And this indicates to me that, thinking back to the previous hexagram, when we look back at what's been done in the past, maybe we recognize that it has not been done very well. And if things have not been done well, it's important that they are announced, because announcement is a key feature of this hexagram, hexagram 43. We have to announce it to the court of the Emperor of China, whatever. We don't keep something to ourselves, because we need action. If we do not mention that there's a problem, something might be, for example, we might feel that there is a problem. We might feel that something is not right, and we want to keep it to ourselves, and that is not the right approach. We need to be honest. We might not make ourselves popular by being honest, but if mistakes have been made, and I think perhaps mistakes have been made, looking back at that previous hexagram, when I said we look back and we judge things by how things have been done in the past, but I'm thinking they've not been done very well, and that could apply to anything. For example, if you have had some work done in your house, and I don't know, whatever it is, a builder, electrician, or whatever, and if it kind of doesn't look good to you, it looks as if something is wrong, then you've got to be honest. Got to be honest about, someone else is having some work done on their house and it doesn't look good to you, you say. So whatever your suspicions here, you've got to be honest. And there is a kind of a hint here with breakthrough that there is an opportunity to kind of resolve the situation. So things might have been done badly. There might be a danger sort of in the offing. Something terrible, or at least bad, might be about to happen. But if we speak now, then we can perhaps avoid the danger. Or another way of looking at breakthrough is we've seen how other people have been damaged by something, because there is this idea of, we hear the cries of the prisoners. The enemy army has overwhelmed the village. Villagers are being taken prisoner. What do? We hear their cries. We make good our escape. So there is another way of looking at it, and it's not necessarily, or I don't think it is, about us getting involved in a conflict. It's best to flee, and so that is another way of looking at it. But if you feel that something's wrong, if you feel that something's been done wrong, then I think you have to be very open about it. And that's it. That's all I've got to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.